Thank you very much. I've been introduced as someone who works for the IT sector, for the innovation sector, but I'm not really going to speak about that. I'm going to speak about something which I did a long time ago in the early stages of my career. In the year 2000, the World Bank sanctioned a very novel project in the combined state of Andhra Pradesh. And the mandate of the project was to help the poorest of the poor. In fact, as all of you would know, we use the term poor very, very loosely. But poor is not a homogeneous group. There are, of course, poor, there are the borderline poor, then the poor, then the poorer. But there are some people at the bottom of the pyramid whom we can call the poorest of the poor. And the mandate of this project was that we must do something to help the poorest of the poor. And the experience is, Indian experience, global experience, that through multiple government programs, through multiple government schemes, poorest of the poor are the most difficult to reach out to. In fact, it has been seen that they remain marginalized even if crores of rupees are spent for the poor people. So first time ever in India, World Bank tried this out to design a program specifically for the poorest of the poor. I was given the opportunity to work as the first project director in this project in a district called Chittoor. Now, those of you who are not familiar, it's of course in the erstwhile combined state of Andhra Pradesh. Chittoor is a part of the region which is called Rayalaseema, and there is very stark poverty in pockets of Rayalaseema. Rayalaseema is a drought-prone region, extremely scanty rainfall once every 2 to 3 years. And obviously, the poorest of the poor don't have any assets. They depend completely on wage labor. So in bad agriculture years, they have really nothing to fall back upon. Many of them migrate. And as I said, they live in thatched houses. They don't have any possessions. They have huge debt burden. They are perpetually in debt. They have borrowed money from money lenders at huge rates of interest, and that also adds lots of stress in their lives. And as I said, it's not to say that the government has not done anything for the poor. In fact, as some of you would know, the administrative unit in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana is called the Mandal. A Mandal is typically 40,000 population, 8,000 households. And in a Rayalaseema kind of a context, about 3,000 households will be the poorest of the poor. So I had data of Chittoor district, and the data was amazing. The data was also very perplexing. The data showed that in every Mandal, 15 crores, 18 crores, 20 crores have been spent since 1950, since India became independent and started spending on developmental programs. 2015, 18 crores have been spent for poor. But when we went to the Mandal to find out, to take stock about poverty, the information that we got was completely the reverse. People used to tell us that poor have become poorer and poorest are really at the verge of starvation. So it appeared very paradoxical that I'm spending 20 crores, 15 crores, 18 crores on the one hand, and instead of things improving, they're actually worsening. And obviously, when we would confront the Mandal bureaucracy, the Mandal officials, on why does this happen? Obviously, the standard answers will come out. This 20 crores is only on paper. Lots of it is kind of knocked off in corruption. And then various other things, like the poor are not really trained in how to use that assistance which they are getting. The focus is only on meeting targets, fulfilling, crunching the numbers. There's very little of backstopping, very little of hand-holding support. Chittoor, some of you will be amazed to know, is the second largest milk producing district in the country after Anand, and huge number of cows exist. So a very common way of spending money for the poor in the past used to be give cows and buffaloes to them. And we took stock that if all the cows which were given to the poor, if they were to be organized somewhere, there'll be no space for human beings to stand. There will be a complete stampede. But we know that that doesn't happen. In fact, there are many instances we have seen ourselves that a poor person is giving a cow in the morning and he sells it in the evening. And it appears very counterintuitive. If I tell you that I'm going to give you a cow, the belief will be that, okay, I use the cow, I nurture the cow, I get some milk, I sell that milk, I use that surplus to buy another cow, and then I do that again. Eventually, I own a mini dairy, I become prosperous. But nothing of that kind happens. You take a cow in the morning and you sell it off in the evening. So why is it that there is no vision in the minds of the poorest of the poor? As it would be obvious to you, the mind space of the poorest of the poor is very different. So what goes on in their minds 24/7 is extremely survival-related issues. I'm working in this farmer's fields for the last 5 days. The work will get over after 2 days. Where will I find work the third day? I have borrowed money from someone. He's pressing me to return that money. How will I return that money? I require something else very urgently. Where am I going to get it from? So these are the basic questions which occupy his minds 24/7. So these were the set of people, the poorest of the poor, with whom we were required to work. Now, let me also ask you something. What do you think the poorest think about the government? And if I had a smaller audience, I would have actually engaged you to answer this question. But I know that many of you would tell me, even if I had asked you, that the government is very indifferent towards the poor of the poorest of the poor. The government is inaccessible. It is too far removed. It is insensitive. If you are not very polite, you may also tell us that the poorest think that the government is full of dacoits, the government is full of thieves, the government is full of robbers. And it's not very difficult to see where these answers are coming from. See, the face of the government in a village is a government functionary who is called the Village Administrative Officer, the VAO. And there are certain typical characteristics about this VAO. First of all, the VAO doesn't live in the village. He lives in some nearby town, and typically he owns a scooter or a motorcycle. So occasionally when you hear a motorcycle getting into the village, you can make out that the VAO is coming to the village, like a guest appearance in a movie. And typically when he goes to a village also, most of his time is spent with the zamindars, the sarpanches, and most of what they discuss is shrouded in secrecy. It is always behind closed doors. And the general impression which is given is that they are discussing some scheme, some money is about to come, how much will I keep, how much will I give to you, and so on and so forth. And on the rare occasions that they are required to go and talk to the poorest of the poor, they'll do it with absolute insensitivity. Take this form, put your signature, it's 4 o'clock, I have to rush, just sign it there, put your thumb impression there. And this is all the kind of conversation they will have with the poorest of the poor. So while the poorest may not be literate, they may not be educated, but they are seeing this day in and day out. And that is why they confirm this impression that the government is really full of insensitive, apathetic people who are out there to rob them. So here was the dilemma for us. As a government, we want to do something for the poorest of the poor, but the poorest of the poor think of you as thieves, as dacoits, and so on and so forth. So we took a very important decision that we will keep the government out of this program. And then we decided that we will run this program by recruiting young boys and girls. We used to call them community coordinators who will work with the poorest of the poor and help in bringing about the social change. Now, the first thing which, so in Chittoor district, for example, I recruited about 140 people, and I got amazing people who had high levels of educational qualifications, who were PhDs, who were BTechs, MBAs, masters in social work. And it's not that they were unemployed or unemployable. They could have got jobs anywhere in the world, but each of them had a passion to prove themselves, to do something of worth. And we selected them to work with the poorest of the poor. And just to contrast themselves with the village administrative officer, the first decision which they took was that we will start living with the poorest of the poor. So as you can imagine, there won't be any great facility. There won't be anything great in the habitations where the poorest of the poor would live, but whatever was available, they would manage with that. I remember one village, the livelihood, unfortunately, in that village for the poorest of the poor was to make illicit liquor. As you would know, in some villages, they have those, those palm trees, and they will pull those fruits and make that illicit liquor. When our coordinator went into that village, they suspected him to be a plainclothes policeman, and they threw chili powder in his eyes. So this coordinator had to be kind of taken off. We got his eyes washed. But he was so persistent, he went again after a week. This time also he was kind of roughed up, and they were not very welcoming. He withdrew, and then he went again after a few days for the third time. And this time they kind of tolerated that, okay, we will look at what he does and what he has to do. We'll keep an eye on him. And I'll tell you later in the story what kind of change happened in that village. I mean, some unbelievable, unimaginable kind of changes were brought about in that village. So, as I said, coordinators started living with the community, and this living was not symbolic or shambolic for 1 day or 2 days. They lived there with them for months altogether, weeks altogether, and gradually a very amazing kind of bonding started building between the poorest of the poor and the community coordinators. So, see, when I said that, and in the morning, we all heard Praveen Kumar speak, Now, he mentioned about the condition of Dalits, etc. Let me also share a piece of social reality, particularly in the Rayalaseema villages. So I mentioned to you there is a hierarchy of the poor, but if you look at the overall hierarchy in the village, the zamindars are obviously at the top, followed by rich farmers, then the borderline, average kind of people, then poor, then someone else, and the poorest. And typically when I take this session in a classroom kind of a context, I put it like a quiz. Who occupies that dash? The zamindars, the rich, the borderline or average, the poor, question mark, the poorest. And many times people find it very difficult to fill that blank. It's of course, it's a kind of a trick question. The answer is animals. But it's also not a very question completely. There's lots of social reality behind it. In Rayalaseema villages, for example, a zamindar typically will have 20 cows. He will have some 5 or 10 goats. He will know the names of each cow. One cow will be called Hema Malini, one cow will be called some Savitri, and so on and so forth. But he won't know the names of the poorest of the poor who live at the fringes of the village. For him, they're all one big mass of people who just have to be called as bonded laborers or slave labor. When a cow falls sick, heaven and earth will be raised to get the cow treated. But if someone has died there also, it won't register upon him. So in that social hierarchy, the poorest's fates are actually the social dignity is even lower than that of animals. So imagine for such kind of people, here is a highly educated person, a coordinator, who is living with them 24/7. He doesn't even care about the zamindars. He doesn't care about the rich. He's all the time available with such people. And the kind of bonding which develops between them is amazing. And thereafter, the coordinator uses that mind space to start talking about poverty. See, as many of you would know, the poorest of the poor typically also believe that they are born the poorest or born the poor because of God's wish. It is karma. And it's also very important to remove such ideas from their minds. So our coordinator, only after he has gained that kind of acceptance, tells them that there is nothing like karma or God's wish. God will never want anyone to be poor. So then we explain to them that poverty is something which we can get rid of, but there are ways of getting rid of. At that point in time, in the social mobilization process, a very important conversation happens, which is that how much do you really require to come out of your poverty? And the aspiration that we set in these villages is that while you are the poorest of the poor, of course, I don't want you to become a zamindar right away, but there are lots of non-poor people, some average kind of people in the villages. What is it that they have which you do not have? So for example, if they live in a brick house, they have 2 acres of land, they have 2 cows and 4 goats. How much will it take for you to get all that? And we actually do a math, we do the calculation. And in those days, this project, as I said, started in the year 2000. So when we used to do the math at that point in time, and of course, these are Rayalaseema remote villages in Chittoor. These are not our Banjara Hill rates or Jubilee Hill rates. So it used to come to around 80,000 rupees. If I give 80,000 to you, you can acquire all these things and become a non-poor over a period of time. Now, the question was that I need 80,000 rupees, but how much can I get on my own, by myself? And we found out that a poorest of the poor person cannot even get 8 rupees. I require 80,000 rupees, but even 8 rupees is difficult for me to get. And then we would explain to the poorest that there are people who are prepared to give that money to you, but they don't give anything to you because you lack credibility. And this is the crux of bringing people out of poverty. How can you build that credibility? How can you make them trustworthy? And therefore, the next step of the social mobilization process would be to teach them how do you demonstrate that credibility in action. So many of you would know the self-help group model has worked very well in different parts of the world. We would do the same, encourage the poorest to form into self-help groups, despite their hardships, despite their sufferings, save some small amount, but be very loyal and fair and just in their group activities. So if you have decided to save, let us say, 1 rupee every week, be disciplined and put that money in that group kitty. The moment some small amount is raised, whoever requires that loan, be very liberal in giving that money, but whoever has taken that money also, bring that back into the group. And as I said, over a period of time, when this kind of group dynamic started to build, we exposed banks to these self-help groups. And though I had planned that I'll not use any slides in my presentation, I'll just show you one particular slide, which actually shows the kind of money which our groups were able to mobilize. So as I said, people who could not get even 8 rupees by themselves at the end of the project had 50,000 crores revolving around them. People who had no credibility at all were found to be absolutely creditworthy to run programs, etc. And in 2014, after 10 years of this project, actually the national government did what is called the National Sample Survey. And they found that Andhra Pradesh, of course, when I mean Andhra Pradesh, I refer to the combined Andhra Pradesh at that time. This was the leader in the country in bringing down poverty. And it is not just money alone which moved in the hands of the people. Social dignity also improved. And as I was mentioning to you, I'll tell you about the village where they threw chili powder in the eyes of the coordinator. So as I said, that village used to brew liquor, illicit liquor. And again, it's a matter of shame, but I'm sure we all know this, that liquor is high in demand when elections happen. So in 2004, elections in Andhra Pradesh Assembly and Parliament were announced. So very close to where these poorest of the poor used to live was a village where the zamindars used to live. So zamindars must be used to getting liquor supply from this particular habitation. So the zamindar called for them. By then, the mobilization had become very strong. These people had stopped making liquor. They had preferred to do the sheep rearing. Sheep were arranged for them. And they were leading normal lives. They were making money, and so on and so forth. So I think I'll show this to you. So historically, the way they would interact with the zamindar and the rich farmers of that village would be that they would walk like this. They will stand like this. They will listen, and then they will go back. This time what happened was, my coordinator was present there, so this is not something we are making it up. There are eyewitnesses, credible eyewitnesses. The zamindar called them. 4 of them decided to go to that village. First of all, they walked like this. This itself is unbelievable. For people who for generations used to go like this, for them to walk like this itself was amazing. But zamindar must have felt that getting that liquor is more important now. I'll fix them later on. When the 3 of them went and stood up like this, he told them that from tomorrow I require some 10 barrels, 20 barrels, or whatever. Now what these people did was, they stood like this, looked into his eyes, and told him, we have stopped doing this, turned back, and went away. So amazing kind of, unbelievable kind of social transformation has happened. And it has happened in village after village after village. And the point is, the bottom line is that poor have limitless ability to transform their lives, but they require a catalyst force to help them do that. Thank you very much.